Parshas Yithro contains the Associative Rites, the 10 Commandments. And I'd like to point out a very interesting thing that Chazal tell us. The Gemara says in Masechet Brachos that the Chachamim wanted to add the daily recitation of the Associative Rites to Kriya Shema. Because we have three parshiyas, three sections of Kriya Shema, Shema, Vayim Shema Yalayomer. They wanted to add the Associative Rites as a fourth portion of Kriya Shema. And they didn't do it b'nei taromas haminim, because of the contention of the heretics. Because if we would place some emphasis on the Associative Rites, the heretics would say that's the only part of Torah which is divine. And the rest of Torah was written by Moshe, composed by Moshe. The Associative Rites, that is God-given. So in order to avoid this misconception, the Chazal did not make the Associative Rites part of the daily prayers. Now the Rambam in Tshuva writes a very interesting thing. There's a custom that many communities have to stand when the Associative Rites are read. And the Rambam was opposed to this custom, because he said, just like the Gemara says, that the Chazal did not want to institute the daily recitation, because that would lead people to think that only the Associative Rites are divine, so any special honor we give to the Associative Rites could lead to the same misconception. And therefore he was opposed to the common practice, the almost universal practice, of standing for the reading of the Associative Rites. Now, this doesn't mean the Associative Rites aren't special. No, they are special. They are obviously a unique portion of Torah. It's just that if you misunderstand the nature of their uniqueness, you might come to a mistake, to an error, that it's unique because it's the only part that was given by God. No, that's not true. We believe every word of the Torah was given by God. But certainly there is something special about the Associative Rites, and that is evidenced by the fact that that's the only thing that God chose to reveal to the Jewish people on the day of the giving of the Torah. So there is something special about it. Don't make the mistake and think that it's the only thing that was written by God. That error we want to avoid, and therefore perhaps in normative practice we don't do anything to show the Associative Rites are special, not to lend to that misconception. But obviously it is special in some way, and I'd like to explore tonight what is special about the Associative Rites. The Maharal points out that we have two different bodies of law. We have Associative Rites and we have Taryag Mitzvahs. We have the 10 Commandments and we have the 613 Mitzvahs. By the way, the Associative Rites are not 10 of the 613. Some of the Dibros contain more than one of the 613 mitzvahs. So, for example, the Dibur of Shabbos, the 4th commandment, has two mitzvahs. The mitzvah saseh, the positive command of Kiddush, which is learned from Zohar Asem HaShabbos Lakacho, and the negative command of Lo Sasel Kol Malacha, not to perform prohibited labor. So, even though it's counted as one of the 10 commandments, it really contains two of the 613 mitzvahs. The second commandment, it's one commandment, but it actually includes 4 different prohibitions, 4 of the 613 mitzvahs, various aspects of idolatry. So the systems don't coincide. We have 10 commandments, whatever that means, and we have 613 mitzvahs. How do we understand this? The Maharal explains like this, that there are really 2 different aspects of Torah. One aspect of Torah is divine self-revelation. God wanted to reveal himself to mankind, that mankind should have some idea about God and his nature. So he revealed himself by giving us Associative Rites. Now how does it reveal something about God's nature? Well, I'll give you a mashal. Let's say, for example, I wanted to get to know you. I wanted to understand what's important to you, what are your priorities, what are your values. So I might do it this way. I'll give you an assignment. I'll ask you, give me your plan for a utopian society. So if you would tell me, well, in the utopian society, there'd be free beer and a lot of good things to eat, well, that would mean one thing. If you tell me that in your utopian society there'd be justice and wisdom, but that would mean something else. So a legislative agenda is really revealing of the nature of the lawgiver. If you want to understand something about God, you see what is important to him, what he values. So that's the idea of Associative Rites. Associative Rites is divine self-revelation. God wants to reveal something about himself. It's very interesting that the first word of the Associative Rites, Anochi, the Gemara in Maseches Shabbes says is a notrikain. It's an acrostic. Each of the letters stands for a word. And it's Ana, Nafshai, Kisavis, Yehavis. I, myself, Ana, I, Nafshai, myself, Chav, Kisavis, I wrote it, Yehavis, I gave it. I, myself, wrote it and gave it. So the Sasema says it doesn't simply mean that I wrote the Torah and gave the Torah. What it means is I wrote and gave myself. I revealed myself. That's Ana Nafshai. I myself wrote down and gave over. Meaning you want to understand me, you want to know me, you know what I'm all about? So you should know that's what I did in writing the Torah. I revealed myself to mankind. Now, revelation of God is always associated with the number 10. When we think about historical contexts, how did God reveal himself as the creator of the world? Chazal say, Ba'asara Maimaras Nibra Ha'olam. The world was created with 10 statements. So God revealed himself as creator with 10 commandments. He revealed himself as the liberator in Egypt with 10 makos, 10 plagues. He revealed himself at Har Sinai as the lawgiver with 10 commandments. Now, if you're a little bit on the mystical side, as you know, the idea of Eser Sfiros, right? The 10 attributes of God, which are really the ways in which God reveals himself in the world. Why is 10 the number associated with divine self-revelation? Asara Maimaras, Aser Makas, Aser Sadibras, Eser Sfiros. So the morale is a very interesting thing. In our system of numeric notation, we write down numbers. So it's a system of place value. In other words, you have on the right, you have the units column. To the left of that, you have the tens column. And to the left of that, you have the hundreds column. So really, 1, 10, and 100 are really all the number 1. Just in order that you should know in which column the 1 is located, we have the zeros to fill the unused places. So if you're talking about a single thing, and 1 is in the rightmost units column. If the 1 is in the tens column, you have a 0 to fill the units column. If the 1 is in the hundreds column, you have 2 zeros to fill the tens and the units column. But that's the system of place value. So in reality, when you have 10, it is no longer 10 individual units. It is a single body of 10. In the same way that when you go to the store and buy eggs, you buy 1 dozen eggs. So even though it's 12 eggs, it's a multitude of eggs, but it's really 1 dozen. 10 is really 1 body of 10. It's symbolized with the number 1. The 0 is only, again, to fill the units place. So he says like this, that when you have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, then you're dealing with a multitude of units. When you add 1 more and it becomes 10, it becomes a single body of 10, like a single dozen. Right? It's not just like 8, 9 eggs. It's a single dozen of eggs. It's a single 10. And therefore, that's a very, very appropriate metaphor for God's attributes. Because although God reveals himself in seemingly a multitude of ways, but we know there's an underlying unity. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The Lord is one. That means even though sometimes he displays himself with midas hadin, with firmness, strictness, sometimes with midas harachamim, kindness and generosity, but there is an underlying unity. And that's symbolized by the concept of 10, which is one body of 10 units. So that's Aseret Adibros. Aseret Adibros is divine self-revelation. That's one aspect of Torah. It's God wanting to reveal himself to mankind, so we should know something about him. Now there's another aspect of Torah. Torah is the ultimate self-help book. As if a person wants to refine himself, perfect himself, his personality, his opinions, so observance of the mitzvahs is a program for self-improvement. Now the number 613 is associated with the parts of the body. This is very interesting. Now the Zohar HaKadosh says that we know the 613 mitzvahs are divided into two parts. There are Ramach, 248 mitzvahs aseh, positive commandments, and there are 365 negative commandments. The Zohar says that the 248 correspond to the Ramach Evarim. There are 248 body parts. Now a body part, by the definition of Chazal, is a part of the body that has a bone. That is called an avar. If it has a separate bone, then it is called an avar. The hand, the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, Maseches Olas, has 30 bones in it. Now, I'm not an expert in anatomy, but 14 I can account for. Because the thumb has 2 bones after the knuckle, and each finger has 3 bones after the knuckle. So just the 5 fingers alone are 14 bones. Right, 4 times 3 is 12, plus number 2 is 14. That's, by the way, that the numerical word of the word yad is 14, because the fingers have 14 bones. But the palm also has bones in it. This is a little beyond my expertise. The Gemara says between that and the wrist, you're talking about 30 bones in each hand, and the feet also there's a large number of bones, the ribs, the vertebrae, etc. 248 bones in the body. I don't know if modern biologists count the bones the same way. It may be that there are differences of opinion as to how to divide the vertebrae and that type of thing, but Chazal hold there are 248 bones, and therefore there are 248 separate body parts. Each part is defined as a part of the body that contains a bone. And there are 365 gidim, 365 strands. It's hard to know whether this means blood vessels, nerves, sinews, but there are 365 gidim, and together 248 plus 365 correspond to the parts of the body. That means that each one of the 613 mitzvahs is designed to perfect a part of the body, part of the human being. And that's the other aspect of Torah, that it is a self-help book. It's a way of refining and perfecting the human being. So there are 2 different aspects of Torah. Aseret Adibros, the number 10, 10 commandments, that is the aspect of divine self-revelation. 613 mitzvahs is the aspect of Torah which is the perfection of the human being. I want to point out an interesting thing, that what were the Aseret Adibros written on? On tablets of stone. What are the 613 mitzvahs written on? On the parchment of a Sefer Torah, animal skin. And this is very appropriate. You see, one of the things that we believe about God is that God is fundamentally unchanging. And therefore, the Aseret Adibros, which is the aspect of Torah, which is divine self-revelation, is inscribed as well on the thing which is unchanging. It's stone. And by the way, even in our common speech, when we talk about something which is fixed, which doesn't change, what do we say? It's carved in stone, right? It's a metaphor that comes from the Associative Rites. But carved in stone means it's unchanging, it's permanent. And that's true. If God is unchanging, so likewise that aspect of Torah which is divine self-revelation as well is unchanging. So it's carved on tablets of stone. But the other aspect of Torah which relates to the human condition is written on a thing which is organic, a thing which goes through the same cycle of growth and ultimately decay. This is the skin of an animal. Just as a human being goes through that life cycle. So therefore the aspect of Torah which corresponds to the perfection of the human being, the means of perfection, is written on an animal skin because it relates to the human being who himself undergoes the patterns of growth, development, decay, death, etc. So this is the idea why the Associative Rites are unique. It's not because it's the only thing that's min hashamayim. That would be a grievous error. If a person would say that only the 10 Commandments are given by God, the rest are Moshe's creation, that is a heresy, and that we have to avoid at all costs, even if it means denying us the privilege of reciting the Associative Rites daily in the synagogue, as the Gemara says. But nevertheless, the Associative Rites are important. These are the ways that God reveals himself to us. 613 mitzvahs are the details which God provided for our own personal development and growth. In the Associative Rites, one of the dibros is the dibur of Shabbos. And it's very interesting that there are two different versions of the Associative Rites. We have the Associative Rites in Parshas Yithro, and we have the Associative Rites in Parshas V'Aschanan. As Moshe Rabbeinu in the Mishnah Torah, in his review of Jewish history and the mitzvahs, he reviews the Associative Rites. There are differences. Now, the most well-known difference is the fact that in Parshas Yithro, in our Parsha, the commandment begins with the words, Zachar es Yom HaShabbos Lakacho. Remember the Shabbos day to keep it holy. And in Parshas V'Aschanan, it is written, Shomor es Yom HaShabbos Lakacho. Guard the Shabbos. So here, remember the Shabbos, there, guard the Shabbos. Now, which did God say at Har Sinai? Zochar or Shomar. So of course anybody that goes to shul or says the Kabbalah Shabbos, says L'chadodi, knows that we say Shomar v'Zochar b'dibur echad. They were given in one statement. And this is what Chazal say, that Zochar v'Shomar b'dibur echad nemru, that God said both simultaneously, which is something that it is impossible for a human to do. No human being can utter two different words simultaneously. And it's Efshar La'izim L'Shmaya. And it really is impossible for the ear to hear such a thing. Because how could a person hear two different words simultaneously? So this is clearly miraculous. That Zachar and Shomar were said simultaneously. Now what is the significance of this fact? That Zachar and Shomar are said simultaneously. So let me point out two ideas. There are undoubtedly many more. But I'll point out two ideas. First, let's understand, what does Zachar mean? What does it mean to remember the Shabbos? So the first thing is that Zachar is a mitzvah saseh. That's a positive commandment. By contrast to the later sentence, which says, Lo sasa kol malacha, don't perform any labor, that's a negative commandment. That's a thou shalt not. But Zachar is a positive commandment. So what does it obligate us to do? To remember Yom HaShabbos. Remember the Yom HaShabbos. So Chazal say that this is the mitzvah saseh of Kiddush. When we say Kiddush Friday night, we are fulfilling this mitzvah of remembering the Shabbos day to make it holy, to sanctify the Shabbos. When we say words in praise of Shabbos, in honor of Shabbos, that is the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Zochar Esem Shabbos L'Kadsho. Now, we recite the Kiddush over wine. But most Rishonim say that that aspect, that the Kiddush recited over wine, is only midrabanan. That is only a rabbinic requirement. The midaraisa, the biblical commandment, a person can fulfill with words alone. This is what the Magen Avraham says in Shulchan Aruch. I saw in a sefer, the Shmir Shabbos L'Chasa brings from Shlomo Zalman Auerbach a tremendous proof to the contention of the Magen Avraham that the Torah requirement can be fulfilled with words alone. An amazing proof. He says, if there's a mitzvah to say Kiddush on Shabbos, when Shabbos falls out on Yom Kippur, how do you fulfill this mitzvah?
Positive mitzvah overrides the negative mitzvah.
So how do you fulfill this positive mitzvah, right, of saying Kiddush? Right? On Shabbos, when Shabbos is Yom Kippur, you can't do it on wine.
No.
So it must be that wine is only a rabbinic requirement. But the biblical command you can fulfill without the wine. It's an amazing proof. But the Magen Avraham says this in Shulchan Aruch, and he says that therefore a person can fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush when he says the Shemona Esrei at Mariv. The Shemona Esrei at Mariv also says lovely things about Shabbos. That Zecher L'Masa Bereishis, it's a commemoration of the creation of the world, and so on and so forth. And therefore, when a person comes home and says Kiddush, really it's only a rabbinic obligation, because the Torah obligation he fulfills with having said the tefillah. Rabbi Kiva Eger says an even greater Kiddush. Rabbi Kiva Eger says that if a person greets his friend and says Good Shabbos, he fulfills the mitzvah daraisa of Kiddush. Because he also said something nice about Shabbos. I don't know. Mr. Brura has a problem with this. He says, because when you say Good Shabbos, you were not really saying anything about the Shabbos. You're extending a wish that you should have a pleasant Shabbos, you should enjoy the Shabbos, you know, the food should be tasty, and the company should be good, and you should get a good night's sleep, and whatever. But you're not really saying anything in praise of Shabbos when you say Good Shabbos. So Mr. Brura thinks that Rabbi Geiger went a step too far with this contention that a person fulfills the Torah obligation of Kiddush simply by saying Good Shabbos. But this much, the poskim, the halachic disciples all agree that certainly with the Shemona Esrei, with the tefillah, a person can fulfill the biblical obligation. The obligation of reciting it over wine is only rabbinic, and that, of course, comes later. So it's a mitzvah saseh, it's a positive command. What does shamar mean? What does shamar mean? Now, Chazal say an amazing thing. Chazal say that whenever it says in the Torah, Hishomer, pen, va'al, these various words, guard yourself, lest, please don't. These are all considered mitzvahs lo saseh. These are negative commandments. Thou shalt not. So Shomar Asiyom Shabbos L'Kadsho is simply a reiteration of the prohibition of prohibited labor. Okay? So Zochar is the positive aspect of Kiddush, and Shomar is the negative prohibition of forbidden labor. And they were said simultaneously. Right? Zochar and Shomar, but they were Echad Nemru. Now, what is the significance of that? Now, by the way, in Halacha, it has great significance. The Gemara says. You see, we know the rule is that generally women are exempt from time-bound positive mitzvahs. Mitzvahs aseh shezman grama. So they're exempt, for example, from sukkah, from lulav, shofar. They're allowed to do it voluntarily, but there's no obligation. But Kiddush the Shabbos is an exception. The Gemara says that women are equally obligated in the recitation of Kiddush. Why? The Gemara says, because since Zochar and Shomar were said simultaneously, kol sheyeshno b'shmira, yeshno b'schira. Whoever is involved in the negative prohibition of forbidden labor, And that includes everybody, because everybody is obligated to observe mitzvahs lo sasa, thou shalt not. So kol yeshno b'shmir, yeshno b'schir. Whoever is involved in the one is involved in the other. So even though Kiddush in theory should be a mitzvah saseh shazman grama, a time-bound positive commandment, and women should be exempt, Allah is not that way. Women are exempt, are obligated in Kiddush the same as men. So the question is, but is there some lesson that has to be derived from this? I have to tell you an interesting thing, that there are people who think that they can have a Shabbos which has positive aspects without accepting the restrictions of Shabbos. Don't take a person who's unwilling, unready to embrace the prohibitions of Shabbos. I'm not going to stop driving, I'm not going to stop turning on the lights, I'm not going to stop cooking, I'm not going to stop shopping, etc. But on the other hand, I do want to make Shabbos something special. I want to make it holy, a nice time for family, for even spiritual thoughts. So they tried to have a half Shabbos, if you will. Right? We'll have a Shabbos which has the positive aspect to it, and at the same time, I will not be encumbered by the obligation to observe the negative sides. What the Rebbeinu Shalom is telling us by saying Zachar and Shamar simultaneously is that ultimately it doesn't work. Because if you want to infuse the Shabbos with positive value, the only way to do it is by carving out the space and tearing yourself away from the activities of the week. Because if you think that you can drive and shop and work and do everything, and at the same time Shabbos will be what it's meant to be, it can't work. You see, it's interesting. We do have holidays that on which rabbinic holidays on which malach is permitted. So we know Purim, right? Purim, we drive, we use electricity, we cook, and somehow it doesn't seem that we've damaged what Purim is meant to be. Right? Purim is just as glorious as it is with the performance of forbidden labors. But remember, Purim is only once a year. Purim is only once a year. So once a year we can motivate ourselves to celebrate a Purim. But Shabbos, week in, week out, week in, week out, week in, week out. How do you preserve the integrity of an observance which is so frequent? So you have to create that separation between Shabbos and the other 6 days of the week. Whereas if Shabbos is simply going to be like every other day of the week, I'm going to go to work and use electricity and cook and write and buy and sell, yet I'm going to try to infuse the Shabbos with some positive value, it's not going to work. Because you have to create that space for Shabbos, and that is achieved through the not doing malacha, and then, now that you have that space, you can infuse that with sanctity and holiness. And God felt that this point is so important that He brought it out by reciting the Zachar and the Shamar, these two words, simultaneously, with Dibur Echad. They are inseparable. They aren't two separate aspects of the Shabbos, in which one might think you could have one without the other. For example, let's say you have two different mitzvahs. Let's say you have the mitzvah of Shofar on Rosh Hashanah and the mitzvah of Sukkah on Sukkot. So you can say, it's easy to imagine, I can have a Shofar on Rosh Hashanah without Sukkah on Sukkot. I can have the Sukkah on Sukkot without the Shofar on Rosh Hashanah. These are two separate mitzvahs, two separate times. So, of course, the ideal is to have both. But if I only will have one, at least I'll have the one. Because here on Shabbos, you can't divide the two. You can't separate the Zachar and the Shamar. You can't separate the positive from the negative. If you don't make the space by eliminating the forbidden labors, you're not going to be able to invest and imbue the Shabbos with the positive sanctity that it needs to have. And God brought this out by saying them simultaneously. Another idea I saw in the Sefer, a very interesting idea. And the Ramban writes, it happens to be this week's parasha, that all the mitzvahs saseh, the 248 positive commandments, are expressions of Ahavas Hashem. This is how we express our love of God. We do what will give God satisfaction. That's an expression of our love of God. The negative commandments, desisting, holding back from doing prohibited things, this is an expression of our fear of God, our reverence, our awe of God. Now, the truth is that in most situations, love and fear are almost incompatible. Love draws us close. Fear repels us. But it's hard to imagine someone that you can love and fear at the same time. It's almost very hard to understand. God is the exception, because we are called upon to love God. You should love God, and at the same time, you should revere God. We stand in awe of Him, fear of Him. And the Rambam even goes a step further. The Rambam says that it is the same observation which leads one to these two contradictory responses. He writes, what is the derech, what is the way to achieve love of God and fear of God? He says, when a person reflects on the world, on the wisdom, the intricacy, the detail, the perfection of the physical world, the wonders of the world, then two things happen. Number one, the person is filled with a sense of his own insignificance. You know, you can get together all the Nobel Prize winners that ever lived, and they will not be able to create a mosquito. Can't do it. So, if you reflect on the fact that God created the world and life, all its forms, so immediately you see yourself as being a very, very insignificant part of the world. And when you reflect on God's greatness and your own insignificance, you become filled with the fear of God. At the same time, you become filled with a tremendous yearning to know and understand and be close to such an unimaginably perfect being. And therefore he writes that it's the same reflection that leads a person both to love of God and fear of God. The idea of Zachar and Shamar being said simultaneously is, again, the Mitzvah Saseh and the Mitzvah Lo Saseh. The Mitzvah Saseh, the positive command, which is a reflection of love of God, and the Mitzvah Lo Saseh, which is a reflection of fear of God, is said simultaneously. It isn't one or the other. But in the Jew's relationship to God, it's both simultaneously, love and fear, which as a rule is not possible. But in relation to God, it is expected. Now, it happens to be that this is not the only difference between the two versions. There's a difference. It's not the only difference. In fact, there is a more startling difference. That if you look at the Associative Rites in our parsha, it says that what is the rationale for Shabbos? Why do we keep Shabbos? It says, Ki sheishes yom, because in 6 days, also Hashem made es hashemayim v'sa'aretz, heaven and earth, es hayom v'skol hashabam, the waters and all therein, v'yonach v'yom hashvi, and he rested on the 7th day. When God created the world, He created the world in 6 days, and He rested on the 7th. Al kain, and therefore, Berach Hashem v'siyom hashabbos v'yikacheu. God blessed the 7th day, and He sanctified it. So, in the version of the Associative Rites in Yithro, Shabbos is described as a commemoration of God's having created the world. And it's to impress upon us this idea that God is the creator, and God is the master of the universe, and so on and so forth. If you look in Parshas V'aschanan, in the book of Devarim, a totally different reason. It says there, "V'zacharta ki eved ha'isa be'eretz Mitzrayim." You should remember that you were a servant in Eretz Mitzrayim. V'yiftacha Hashem v'lokecha misham, and God redeemed you. He liberated you from Mitzrayim. Al kein tzivcha Hashem v'lokecha laslas yom Shabbos. And that's why God commanded you to keep the Shabbos. Now, in our Kiddush, we really emphasize both aspects. We say that Shabbos is Zecher L'Masa Bereishis. It commemorates creation. We also say Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim. It also commemorates the Exodus. Now that's based on the two versions of the Associative Rites. Now the exact connection to the Exodus is a little hard to understand. How does Shabbos relate to the Exodus? We'll talk about that in a moment. But this is a contradiction between the two versions. So how do we understand? How do we account for that? The Maharal points out a very interesting thing. That there is a very basic difference between the first four Chumashim, Bereshis, Shemos, Vayikra, Bamidbar, and the book of Devarim. And the Gemara says in Maseches Megillah a very, very fascinating thing. It says that we have two versions of the Teichach, two versions of the blessings and the curses. We have one version in the end of the book of Vayikra, Parshas Bechukosai. We have another version in the book of Devarim in Parshas Kisavo. And the Gemara says that, the Mishnah says that when the curses are read, we do not pause. We do not interrupt. We don't stop reading in the middle and call up another person to continue the reading. And the Gemara says, why is this? Because the verse tells us in Mishlei, Musar Hashem, the rebuke of Hashem, Bini, my son, al timas. Don't scorn that. Don't reject that. If God is giving you Musar, don't walk away. You know, take it like a man or like a woman. But in other words, don't turn away. Don't take a break. Well, listen to it. Accept it. So the Teichach is Musar Hashem. This is God's rebuke. You know, sometimes you have the situation, you know, a person is telling you off, and the person is telling you a critique. You know, you did this, you should do this, you should do this. You don't want to listen. Right? You just plug your ears. So that when Hashem gives you Musar, you have to accept it. So the Gemara says, therefore, that's why Ein Mafsikin B'Klalos. You don't interrupt the Klalos. But the Gemara says a surprising thing, that this halacha really only applies to the Teichacha of the book of Vayikra. That's called Musar Hashem. But the Teichacha of the book of Devarim, even though our practice is also not to interrupt, but Mi'ikar Hadin, really the halacha is you're not to interrupt, because that's Moshe Piatzma. That was Moshe on his own. And therefore it's not called Musar Hashem, it's called Moshe's rebuke. So the Gemara says that the book of Vayikra, the Teichacha of Vayikra, that's called Musar Hashem. That's the rebuke of Hashem. And the Musar of Sefer Devarim is called Moshe Piatzma. The Maharal says like this, that the mitzvahs that are given in the first four books were given by God to Moshe, and then subsequently recorded. But as they were initially said, they were God's words.